The flight attendant's voice rose above the soft hum of the engines, sharp enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her words cut through the air like a blade, every syllable dripping with disdain. Amelia Johnson, calm and steady, lifted her eyes. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink back, didn't let the venom rattle her. Her voice was soft but firm, like water smoothing stone. "I've already told you I'm not moving." Her tone was not angry. It wasn't loud. But it carried power, the kind that forced even those who doubted her to pause for a second. The luxury jet shimmered under the afternoon sun as it sat ready on the tarmac. Inside, it was a picture of opulence, rich leather seats with golden trim, glassware that sparkled under the warm cabin lights, polished wood surfaces gleaming. The air smelled faintly of fresh orchids, a touch of extravagance. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers, blending with the muted conversations of well-dressed passengers. Amelia Johnson moved with quiet elegance, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and slacks that spoke of sophistication without flaunting wealth. Her presence was magnetic, though she sought no spotlight. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who had nothing to prove, but much that she could command if she chose. At the front of the cabin stood Victoria Hayes, the lead flight attendant. Her uniform was impeccable, her hair coiffed to perfection, her smile polished but shallow. To some she offered warmth, to others cool formality. Her eyes scanned people like a scanner searching for flaws. When Richard and Margaret Collins, a couple in their 60s, entered, Victoria greeted them like royalty. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins, welcome back." "It's a pleasure to see you again," she beamed, almost bowing. Richard unfolded his newspaper with calm ease, while Margaret already reached for her knitting, needles clicking before her seatbelt was even fastened. But when Amelia entered, Victoria's smile froze. The warmth disappeared, replaced by a curt nod. "Welcome aboard," she said flatly, as though Amelia's presence somehow disordered the perfection of the cabin. Amelia noticed. Of course she noticed. The sharp contrast in tone was as loud as thunder in a silent room. Yet she chose serenity, moving to her seat with graceful patience. She didn't need validation from anyone, least of all a flight attendant whose smile bent with prejudice. Passengers began to whisper. Charlotte Evans, a glamorous but nosy socialite, leaned toward her companion, her eyes narrowed like a cat's. "Who does she think she is?" she muttered loud enough to invite attention. Daniel Brooks, a businessman in a crisp suit, frowned from across the aisle, his gaze flicking from Amelia to Victoria. He wasn't impressed. Victoria approached Amelia again, lips tight. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began with condescending politeness. "I think you're in the wrong section. This area is reserved for our elite passengers." Amelia looked up calmly. "This is my seat." Victoria stiffened. "I don't think so. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The words hung heavy, sharpened by the implication. Charlotte Evans leaned further, her perfectly curled hair bobbing, eyes sparkling with mischief. "She's trying to sneak a free ride," she whispered to no one in particular. Daniel Brooks leaned forward, his jaw tightening. He didn't like what he was hearing. Amelia's gaze was steady. "You should double-check your passenger list before making assumptions." Victoria's smile sharpened, turning brittle. "I don't need to check anything," she snapped. "Move to the back before I call security." "I'm not moving," Amelia said again, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Tension rippled across the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some avoiding eye contact, others leaning in to catch every word. The air itself seemed to thrum. Victoria turned sharply to Emily Carter, the junior flight attendant who had been hovering nearby, her hands nervously clasped. "Escort her to the back," Victoria ordered. Emily froze, her eyes darting to Amelia, then back to Victoria. Her instincts screamed to do the right thing, check the list, confirm the seat, but Victoria's glare pinned her into silence. With a reluctant nod, Emily stepped forward. Amelia shifted slightly in her seat, her voice calm but weighted. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing," Victoria scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Now get up. Amelia leaned back slightly, her serenity unshaken. Call whoever you need to, she said softly. But I'm not moving, the passengers gasped softly. Charlotte Evans smirked, delighted by the drama. Daniel Brooks leaned further forward, his frown deepening. The Collins couple exchanged subtle looks, Richard peering over his newspaper, Margaret pausing her knitting mid-stitch. Emily Carter's hands trembled as she hesitated. She wanted to step back, to avoid the clash, but Victoria barked again. Now, Emily! Daniel Brooks finally spoke up, his voice steady but firm. From where I'm sitting, she seems perfectly fine. If there's an issue, maybe it's with how you're handling it. Victoria spun toward him, anger flashing in her eyes. Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage this disturbance. Daniel's tone sharpened, calm but pointed. You're the only one disturbing the cabin. Murmurs rose. A few passengers nodded subtly, though most stayed silent, unwilling to draw Victoria's ire. Victoria's face flushed. She stalked off briefly, then returned, tray of sparkling water in hand, her expression tight as a drum. She served Richard and Margaret Collins with exaggerated warmth, then Daniel Brooks with forced politeness, even Charlotte Evans with sugary smiles. But when she reached Amelia, she skipped past without a glance. Amelia waited. A few minutes later, when Victoria passed again, Amelia asked gently, "Could I have some water, please?" Victoria's eyes cut like knives. "I'll get to you when I can," she snapped, breezing past. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Charlotte Evans smirked. Daniel Brooks clenched his jaw. Amelia stayed calm, serene as ever, though her eyes reflected quiet strength. When Amelia stretched her leg slightly into the aisle, Victoria took it as provocation. She deliberately altered her path, her polished shoe striking Amelia's leg. The tray tilted and glasses spilled, water splashing across Amelia's lap. Victoria gasped theatrically, her voice sharp. "Watch where you're putting your legs. You've caused a mess." Heads turned, gasps, murmurs. Amelia brushed calmly at the water, her voice steady. "You walked into me." Victoria leaned closer, venom lacing her tone. "Respect? People like you don't deserve mine." The words hit the air like a slap, before the real slap came. In one shocking motion, Victoria's hand struck Amelia across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like thunder. Passengers froze. Gasps filled the air. Emily Carter's hands flew to her mouth. Daniel Brooks shot from his seat, fury in his eyes. Even Charlotte Evans's smirk faltered. Richard Collins folded his paper slowly, his brows furrowing, while Margaret's knitting needles dropped into her lap. Amelia straightened, her face calm, her eyes unyielding. Her hand did not rise to her cheek. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried like a bell. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." The cabin was so silent that even the steady hum of the engines felt loud. Passengers sat frozen, staring at the scene in disbelief. Some clutched their armrests, others exchanged worried glances, unsure if they should intervene. The sharp sound of that slap still echoed in their minds, hanging in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Amelia Johnson sat unmoving. She did not cry. She did not lash out. She did not crumble as Victoria Hayes might have expected. Instead, Amelia's calmness deepened, her composure unshaken, her posture unyielding. Her face was a mask of quiet strength, and it unsettled Victoria more than any raised voice ever could. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Amelia had said softly, her voice ringing with conviction. Victoria scoffed, though her confidence faltered. "What are you going to do? Call the police? Do you think anyone here will believe you? You're the one causing trouble." But Amelia didn't respond to the insult. She simply reached for her phone, her movements deliberate and calm. She typed a short message with steady hands and placed it gently on the armrest, as though she had set down a loaded weapon she no longer needed to hold. Passengers shifted uneasily. Charlotte Evans, the nosy socialite, leaned closer to her companion, whispering with wide eyes, "Who is she? She doesn't look scared at all. Do you think she's someone important?" Across the aisle, Daniel Brooks sat upright, his hands clasped, eyes fixed on Amelia. A knowing look crossed his face, as if he had begun to piece together the truth. His instincts told him this was not an ordinary passenger. At the front of the plane, Emily Carter clutched the passenger list, her hands trembling. She wanted to cry out, to tell everyone Amelia's name was right there, clear as day. But Victoria's commanding presence loomed over her like a shadow. Still, Emily's conscience burned. Minutes dragged on. The tension grew unbearable. The cabin felt like a stage set for an explosion. Then footsteps echoed. The cockpit door opened, and the pilot stepped out. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He moved with purpose, his eyes searching the cabin until they locked onto Victoria. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice firm, carrying authority. "I'm handling a situation," Victoria replied stiffly, her arms crossed. "This woman refuses to move from a seat she doesn't belong in. She's causing a scene." The pilot's eyes flicked to Amelia, then back to Victoria. His expression hardened. "No," he said flatly. "You need to step aside." Victoria blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me? I'm in charge of the cabin and I—" The pilot cut her off, his voice low but laced with steel. "I just received a call from management. The owner of this plane is on board. Miss Johnson." He turned and gestured toward Amelia. The words fell like a bomb. Gasps filled the cabin. Margaret Collins dropped her knitting needles again, this time onto the floor. Richard Collins folded his paper neatly and adjusted his glasses, peering at Amelia with newfound respect. Charlotte Evans audibly inhaled, her eyes darting between Amelia and Victoria in shock. "She owns the plane?" Charlotte whispered, her disbelief ringing across the aisle. Daniel Brooks nodded slowly, almost proudly, as if he had confirmed what he had suspected all along. "I had a feeling," he muttered half to himself. Emily Carter's face broke into a look of relief, her shoulders sagging with the release of pent-up tension. At last, justice had caught up to the cruelty she had watched unfold. Victoria Hayes, however, stood frozen. Her face turned crimson, then pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She had built her authority on condescension, on sharpness, on false control, and it crumbled in an instant under the weight of Amelia's true identity. "That can't be right," she stammered. There must be some mistake, but deep down she knew. Every instinct told her that Amelia's calmness had never been arrogance. It had been power. Real power. The kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. The captain's voice soon echoed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." Confusion swept through the cabin. Some passengers whispered nervously, others straightened their posture. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the rumble of the engines as the jet began its descent. Victoria stood stiff, her arms crossed tightly, trying to salvage her authority. But beads of sweat formed at her hairline. She felt the stares of the passengers burning holes into her skin. Every whisper felt like an accusation. The jet landed smoothly. Outside, a sleek black SUV rolled up to the tarmac, its glossy exterior shining under the sunlight. Two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, their movements quick and purposeful. They ascended the stairs with the poise of people on official business. The cabin door opened, and as soon as the assistants entered, the energy shifted again. Their eyes found Amelia instantly. One of them smiled respectfully, inclining their head. "Miss Johnson," the assistant said warmly. "Everything is ready for your review." Gasps rippled again. Margaret Collins clutched her husband's hand. Daniel Brooks leaned back in his seat with satisfaction. Even Charlotte Evans, who had been smirking and gossiping, now looked pale and unsettled. Amelia stood slowly. Her blazer caught the light as she adjusted it with measured precision. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, commanding. She turned toward the passengers, her calm voice carrying across the cabin. "My name is Amelia Johnson," she said. "I am the owner of this plane, and I am the owner of this airline." The reaction was immediate. Applause broke out in bursts. Richard Collins gave a small approving nod. Margaret Collins clapped softly, her knitting forgotten. Daniel Brooks smiled broadly, respect clear in his eyes. Charlotte Evans simply stared, her mouth slightly open, her earlier arrogance stripped away. But the applause was quickly followed by silence as Amelia turned her gaze toward Victoria. The flight attendant's knees wobbled under the weight of that look. Victoria Hayes, Amelia said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut steel. Your behavior today has been nothing short of disgraceful. You humiliated yourself, mistreated a passenger, and tarnished the reputation of this airline. Victoria's lips quivered. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken whisper. I didn't know, Amelia raised a hand, silencing her. You didn't know because you didn't bother to treat me or anyone with respect. You made assumptions. You acted on prejudice, and you escalated a situation that required nothing but basic decency. The passengers nodded, some even voicing soft agreements. The murmurs filled the air, a chorus of judgment that only deepened Victoria's shame. Her face flushed scarlet. She shifted her weight, glancing desperately around the cabin for someone, anyone, to defend her. But she found no allies. Not Richard or Margaret Collins, not Daniel Brooks, not even Charlotte Evans. For the first time in years, Victoria felt utterly alone. Then heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs outside. 2 police officers entered the cabin, their uniforms crisp, their presence commanding instant authority. One of them turned toward Amelia. Miss Johnson, he said respectfully, we received your report. Do you wish to press charges? Amelia didn't hesitate. Her voice was firm, steady, and final. Yes. This individual assaulted me in front of multiple witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable. Gasps again. Whispers surged. Charlotte Evans clasped her pearls. Margaret Collins shook her head in quiet dismay. Daniel Brooks sat back, his expression one of grim approval. Victoria's face drained of all color. She took a step back, her voice cracking with panic. Wait! This is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean... But the officer had already stepped forward, reaching for the cuffs. Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The cold click of handcuffs echoed in the cabin, louder than thunder. Victoria's facade shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded. Please, Miss Johnson, I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Amelia's expression did not soften. Her words fell like ice. You didn't mean to get caught. But you did, and now you'll face the consequences. The handcuffs clicked shut and the cabin exhaled, a long, trembling breath that no one realized they'd been holding. Amelia Johnson did not gloat. She didn't need to. Power had never been the point. Clarity was, the officers led Victoria Hayes down the aisle in a hush of rubber soles and stunned whispers, past faces that only minutes earlier had looked to her for leadership. At the door, Victoria turned back once, a last grasp for the control she had squandered. But there was nothing left to seize, only the soft thrum of engines and the leveled gaze of the woman she'd tried to diminish. Amelia stepped forward. Thank you, officers, she said, her voice low and professional. Please provide your names and the incident report number to my assistant before departure. Our legal team will coordinate from here. The elder officer nodded, producing a card. One of Amelia's assistants, still standing in the entryway, recorded the details. The other assistant, tablet in hand, moved discreetly down the aisle, checking on passengers one by one. No one felt abandoned. No one felt ignored. For the first time since boarding, the cabin felt like a place of order, not fear. Amelia turned back to her guests. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, we'll be airborne again shortly. If you need dry cleaning, replacement garments, or special accommodations when we arrive, my team will arrange it. Please press your call button and tell us what you need. No request is too small. The words unlocked a murmur of relief. Margaret Collins dabbed her eyes, half from age and half from gratitude. Richard Collins folded his paper with a soft, approving smile. Daniel Brooks gave Amelia an almost imperceptible nod, the private salute of one professional to another. Even Charlotte Evans, who had spent the first hour floating on gossip, seemed smaller now, humbled, chastened into curiosity rather than spectacle. The crew reset quickly. Emily Carter, still shaken but steady, moved with quiet precision. She replaced the water service, wiped the aisle with a towel the moment a glint of moisture caught her eye, and checked in with Amelia, voice barely above a whisper. Are you all right, Miss Johnson? I am, Amelia said. Thank you for asking, and for trying to do what was right. Emily swallowed hard, something like pride and disbelief crossing her face. I didn't do enough. You did more than you think, Amelia replied. You paused. You questioned. Sometimes that's the courage that changes everything. They took off again, the jet rising into a widening sky. Conversation returned in cautious ripples. Charlotte leaned across the aisle, not bold now, but tentative. Miss Johnson? Amelia turned her way with equal parts patience and boundary. I judged you, Charlotte said simply. I'm sorry. I thought money looked a certain way, or sounded a certain way. She looked down, smoothing a crease that didn't exist. I was wrong. Prejudice isn't a mirror, Amelia said. It's a veil. Everyone looks smaller behind it. Charlotte nodded, chastened and oddly relieved, as if permission to be better had just been granted. The pilot's voice chimed in mid-climb. Cabin crew service may resume. The jazz returned, softer than before. Glasses clinked, but the sound had lost its swagger. What replaced it was steadier, truer. Amelia accepted a cup of tea from Emily, ginger and lemon with a single smear of honey, and started to write. She didn't draft a speech. She drafted a policy. By the time wheels kissed runway at the flight's true destination, the plan had shape and spine. The Dignity Protocol. It would move through the airline like a tide, not a memo. It would begin, not end, with training. It would tie authority to accountability, not to volume. It would give passengers clear recourse, and crew clear protection. Because dignity is not a zero-sum thing. If it feels scarce, someone siphoned it. On the tarmac, a motorcade stood ready. Not garish, just efficient. Paparazzi hadn't arrived yet, but they would. You don't erase a slap heard by a cabin full of phones. Amelia's comms chief met her at the car door. We can stonewall for 24 hours or we can go first, she said. We go first, Amelia answered. We always go first on safety. Dignity is safety. They drove straight to headquarters, a glass and cedar building designed to feel more like a library than a fortress. The board convened within the hour, some in person, others glowing in from 3 time zones. Papers rustled. Screens bloomed with charts. Counsel recited what could and could not be said. Amelia let them finish, then stood, unhurried and unflinching. What happened today is both simple and layered, she began. Simple. A member of our crew assaulted a passenger. Layered. The assault rode in on unchecked bias, lax supervision, and a culture that mistakes composure for consent. Our response will be equally simple and layered. We will defend our passengers. We will defend our good staff. And we will rebuild the parts of our system that taught anyone they could speak to a customer that way and stay employed. She laid the Dignity Protocol on the table. It had 5 pillars. Authority with audit. Any elevated cabin intervention. Seat challenges, security threats, safety calls, must be logged in real time to a secure incident system with a short voice note stating cause. Supervisors review samples weekly. Patterns trigger coaching or removal from duty. Bias interruption drills. Quarterly scenario work not in a classroom, but in a mock cabin with real actors, multiple storylines, ambiguous cues, and a facilitator trained to stop scenes at the moment bias tries to take the wheel. Staff learn 3 moves. Pause, name what you think you see. Pivot, seek verifiable data, manifests, seat maps, IDs, and partner, bring in a second crew member to check your perception before escalation. Passenger Bill of Dignity, a 1-page card at every seatback and in the app, plain language about respect, recourse, and the chain of help. Includes a discreet Help Now QR that pings a cabin supervisor and logs a time-stamped note to the incident system. No more, my word versus yours in the air. Whistle without fear. Named or anonymous reporting for staff and passengers with anti-retaliation teeth. Reports are triaged within 48 hours by a rotating mixed discipline panel. Operations, HR, legal, and a peer representative. Trends go to the board quarterly. Restorative option, not requirement. For harm that doesn't cross criminal thresholds, offer a structured restorative track, facilitated circles, impact statements, agreed practices, because some people learn best by facing what they did. But don't force victims to teach. That is not their job. No one spoke for a long moment. The paper didn't thump. It settled, like something heavy that belongs exactly where it lands. The COO asked the first practical question. The CFO asked the second. Legal marked 2 lines for tightening. Then the chair raised a hand. "Do it," she said. All of it, the story broke before night. Not as a salacious clip, but as a 2-minute preemptive video. Amelia at a plain lectern, no logo wall, no glossy soundtrack. "Respect is a right," she said, "and in our cabins it is non-negotiable. Today a member of our crew violated that standard and assaulted a passenger. Me. I pressed charges. But this isn't about my title. It's about the dignity every person is owed from the moment they step aboard. Here is how we will guarantee it." The video ended with a commitment page and a date, 90 days to full rollout. The comments lit up, but this time the heat carried light. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved on rails greased by evidence. There were witnesses. There was video. There was the crisp chain of custody handed to the district attorney by 2 officers who had never once raised their voices. Victoria Hayes was arraigned for misdemeanor assault. Her union sent an advocate. Her attorney advised contrition. None of that would unring a slap, but the court did what courts do. It measured harm, weighed risk, and insisted on terms. A plea was offered: probation, mandatory counseling, 120 hours of community service, and completion of an intensive bias interruption and de-escalation course certified by a third party. Amelia neither gloated nor intervened. She issued one statement to the press when asked whether she would support incarceration. "Accountability must educate as well as punish. If a sentence can do both, I'm for it. If it teaches nothing, I'm not." Her days filled with design sessions that looked more like rehearsals than meetings. Crews cycled through the mock cabin. An actor in a navy blazer, poised, quiet, took a seat at 1A. Another actor, sharp uniform, sharper tone, made the wrong assumption. "Pause," the facilitator called. "What data do you have?" "None," the trainee admitted. "What feeling do you have?" "Annoyance and superiority." "Name it," the facilitator said. "Now pivot. What data can you get?" The trainee checked a manifest, followed a checklist, and felt the room change in his body. The moment bias loosened its grip, his shoulders dropped an inch. It was visible. It was teachable. Out on the line, passengers noticed small things. Call buttons answered faster. Disagreements diffused sooner. "I don't know," appeared more often, followed by, "Let me check." Emily, promoted to acting lead flight attendant, framed it simply for her team. "We are not less authoritative because we verify. We are more." 2 weeks later, Amelia invited a handful of passengers from the flight to headquarters, not for a press event, but for a listening circle. Richard and Margaret Collins came, hand in hand. Daniel Brooks came in a simple jacket instead of his usual suit. To everyone's surprise, Charlotte Evans came too, unaccompanied, with a notebook full of apologies she didn't yet know how to deliver. They sat in a quiet conference room with windows that made the city look like a map. A facilitator, neutral, humane, set ground rules. Speak from the I, hold stories with care. No cross-examination, no performance. Richard spoke first. "I've flown for 50 years, he said. "My worst habit is thinking I can tell what kind of person someone is by how they hold a newspaper. Turns out I can't. I'm sorry for where I've done that, even silently." Margaret added, "I knit when I'm nervous." I knitted too long that day. They all smiled. Repair needs laughter, small, unforced, earned. Daniel went next. "I run a company that trains managers to handle conflict. I sat here, hands folded, watching conflict mishandled. I intervened once. I could have done more." "Next time I will." Charlotte's turn landed like a hush. "I want to be the person who intervenes," she said. "But sometimes I'm still the person who whispers. I'm trying to retire that version of me." She lifted her eyes to Amelia. "Thank you for not humiliating me when you could have." "Humiliation doesn't teach," Amelia said. "It just hides." The meeting ended without cameras, without swag. People left lighter. The next day, Amelia read the internal summary to the board and asked for one tweak to the protocol. a passenger ally cue, a quiet, visible gesture to signal support without inflaming a situation. After experiments with lanyards and badges, they settled on words, "I'd like to help verify." Simple, de-escalating, actionable, a stranger's invitation to pivot from heat to facts. The airline's safety metrics didn't change, because safety had never been the problem. What changed were the margins where harm likes to hide, the doorway greeting, the tone in the ask, the reflex to escalate because yielding feels like losing. Cabin complaints dropped. Compliments for crew rose. In satisfaction surveys, one phrase appeared over and over. "I felt seen." The civil suit, inevitable, necessary, resolved months later in a settlement whose details mattered less than its shape. Funds directed to an independent aviation dignity lab to research bias in high-altitude decision-making. Scholarships for hospitality students from underrepresented communities. A traveling training program open to other carriers, because a standard worthy of the name should not stop at a company's boundary. On a rainy morning that made the runway look like a ribbon of quicksilver, Amelia walked a new crew through a pre-flight briefing. She didn't lecture. She asked questions. "What's a moment when you knew you were about to misread someone?" She listened as a young attendant confessed he sometimes mistook quiet for non-compliance. "Good," Amelia said. "Now write your script for that moment. The question you'll ask, the data you'll pull, the colleague you'll partner with." Training, she believed, should not make people feel smaller. It should fit them for the size of the job. News cycles moved on, as they always do, but culture stayed moved because procedures had shifted under it. When a video surfaced months later of another airline bungling a seat dispute, comments filled with a new refrain. They should copy Johnson's dignity protocol. Some did. Others scoffed, then quietly called for the slide deck. Pride is often the last resistor and the first to download your PDF. As for Victoria Hayes, the court completed its work. She did the hours. She sat in circles where people described what it feels like to be chosen last, scanned twice, spoken to short. She wrote reflections that started stiff and ended with verbs that bent toward repair. After the probation, she wrote a letter to Amelia, not asking for her job. That bridge had burned, but asking for a meeting, mediated with terms. Amelia accepted, not as a businesswoman, but as a citizen of the small republic two people make when harm has happened and learning might yet occur. They met in a room with ugly carpet and good light. A facilitator framed the time. Victoria began without preface. "I built a ladder out of being right," she said. "Then I climbed it so high I could no longer see people. I slapped you for how small you made me feel, but the truth is, I was already small, and I made you carry it." Her voice shook. "I'm sorry for the harm I did to you and to everyone who watched me do it. I won't ask you to absolve me. I will ask you to believe that I am not finished learning. There are moments when forgiveness is an event. More often it is a practice." Amelia didn't declare anything bright and cinematic. She nodded once, then twice. "If you keep learning," she said, "you won't need my forgiveness to do the next right thing." It wasn't closure. It was a hinge. Sometimes a life swings on something that quiet. On the anniversary of the incident, not celebrated, simply marked, Amelia stood at a small podium in a hangar where sunlight pooled like warm water on the polished floor. Behind her, a jet rested with its nose cone open for maintenance, innards gleaming. "A year ago," she said, "we thought we had a training problem. We had a dignity problem. Today our crews carry checklists for fire and for respect. Because both spread fast if you don't name them early." A low laugh moved through the crowd. She let it sit. "I'm proud of what we built. I'm prouder of what we're still building. Culture is a verb." Afterward, in the quiet that follows good work, Amelia took a late flight, not in a sealed cabin with tinted windows, but on a regular route where the seatback cards wore fingerprints and the armrest had one scratch no one had bothered to buff away. She boarded last, on purpose, and the doorway greeting met her like weather that knows the name of the season. "Good evening," said the lead, not recognizing her. "We're glad you're here," she was. She settled into 3A, buckled once, twice out of habit, and let the low light find the edges of a day that had taken a year to happen. Across the aisle, a young mother soothed a baby with a rhythm older than engines. 2 rows back, an elder asked for hot water. The attendant returned with ginger without being asked. In front, a man stretched his leg into the aisle and then retraced it with a sheepish smile when the cart approached. The crew paused, pivoted, partnered. Quiet choreography in an aluminum tube. At altitude, the world outside the window thinned into ink and stars. Inside, it thickened into something you could almost hold. Not luxury, not branding. Something more stubborn and more generous. It didn't sparkle. It steadied. Amelia closed her eyes and felt the plane lean into the wind the way a good story leans into truth. Without hurry, without theater, with a posture that says, "We know where we're going, and we'll get there together. And if someone forgets the shape of respect for a moment, we'll have a way to remember, written on a card, rehearsed in our bones, carried in our voices." When wheels met runway, it felt less like arrival and more like alignment. People stood slow and kind. The aisle did not become a racetrack. It became a line of human beings making space for one another. At the door, Amelia thanked the crew not as an owner, but as a passenger whose dignity had been held. "You did good work tonight," she said. The lead smiled back, tired, genuine, free of performance. "We have good tools," she answered. "And we use them." Outside, the air was colder than it had any right to be. It woke the skin. Amelia walked toward the car that would take her to whatever was next. The night around her the color of a promise kept. In the terminal behind her, 1,000 small kindnesses happened without anyone filming them. That was the point. The best systems make themselves invisible until the moment you need them, and then they arrive like a handrail exactly where your hand expects to find it. Somewhere over another city, on another route, a different crew practiced the same choreography. A passenger would be misread, then correctly read, then greeted again. A seat map would be checked. A tone would soften. A conflict would end not with triumph, but with procedure. Boring, beautiful procedure. And at the center of it would be nothing more glamorous than a person being treated like a person and a professional being proud of how they did it. The plane that brought Amelia home lifted again, taking with it a culture slightly better than the one that had landed. That is all a leader can hope to build, and all a traveler can hope to board. A vessel that improves itself mile by mile, policy by policy, moment by moment of remembered dignity. And when turbulence came, as turbulence always does, the cabin light stayed steady, the crew's voices stayed clear, and the card in the seat back, creased and ordinary, still told the truth in a font big enough for anyone to read. Respect is a right. On this airline, it is also our practice.